I never thought I'd be the kind of person to sit in a dimly lit kitchen at 2 a.m., staring at my own hands and trying to figure out how everything I thought I knew about someone could just evaporate. But here I am, trying to piece together the last 6 months like a puzzle with missing edges. My name's Jason. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, and until a few weeks ago, I would have told anyone that my life was normal, stable, happy even. I had a steady job at a mid-sized tech company downtown, a decent apartment in a quiet neighborhood, and a girlfriend, well, ex-girlfriend now, named Emily. Emily was smart, beautiful, and a very effortless, you could see she doesn't try kind of way. And when we met, I was convinced I'd finally found someone I could just settle into life with. But that's the problem, isn't it? You think someone's solid, someone's loyal, and then life gives you a gut punch that feels like the universe is personally mocking you. It started around the same time Emily was diagnosed with her condition. She had been feeling off for months, tired all the time, sharp headaches, moments where she'd forget simple words in the middle of sentences. At first, I chalked it up to stress. She works in marketing, a notoriously demanding job with deadlines that never stop. But when she finally went to the doctor, the diagnosis hit like a freight train. It was chronic, serious enough to require treatment and lifestyle changes, but with the right care, she could manage it. She looked at me with those big green eyes, brimming with tears, and said, "I don't know how I'm going to get through this." And I told her, I swear to God, I told her, "We'll get through it. I'm not going anywhere." And I meant it. I dropped everything I could to be there for her, driving her to appointments, managing the insurance chaos, even rearranging my own work schedule so I could sit with her during treatments that left her nauseous and exhausted. I became the shoulder, the comfort, the rock. Hell, I became a full-time caretaker, and I did it because I loved her. Or at least I thought I did. The first few weeks were rough. She was fragile, physically and emotionally, and I'd never felt more needed in my life. I remember one night she was shaking violently with a fever, unable to keep anything down, and I held her on the couch for hours while she murmured about being scared she might be a burden. I told her, over and over, that she wasn't, that I loved her, and that I wasn't going anywhere. I didn't know then how twistedly ironic that promise would turn out to be. I watched her get weaker, held her hair back when she was sick, slept in the recliner by her side more nights than I can count. And still, in all of that chaos, I never imagined there was another side to her life I hadn't been allowed to see. It was about 2 months into the treatment schedule that the cracks started showing. Not in Emily, not yet, but in me. I was exhausted. I mean, truly soul-draining exhausted. Work was piling up, my social life had vanished, and I hadn't slept through a night in months without waking up to check if she needed water, medicine, or just a hand to squeeze. But every time I looked at her, curled up fragile on the couch, I told myself it was worth it. Love demanded sacrifice, didn't it? That's what I kept whispering to myself as my own life shrank around me. Friends stopped texting. Weekends were spent sitting in sterile waiting rooms, holding her hand while doctors debated options I barely understood. And all of it was fine, I told myself. All of it was fine because I was doing the right thing. But then the first suspicious thing happened. I was at her apartment one Friday evening, exhausted beyond words after a particularly grueling week at work, when her phone buzzed on the counter. It was face up, screen glowing. I hesitated. I never looked at her phone, never wanted to. But curiosity, fatigue, and some gnawing anxiety collided, and I glanced at the notification. It was a message from someone named Matt. Just one line. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Miss you." My stomach sank. I shook it off immediately, telling myself she must be talking about a friend or someone from work. Emily has a lot of coworkers, a lot of friends. I shoved my anxiety down, went to make us dinner, and tried to forget about it. But the seed was planted. The next few weeks were a blur of routine, treatment, and subtle tension I couldn't name. She would sometimes text him late at night, phone pressed close, laughing softly in the kitchen while I stood awkwardly in the doorway, unsure if I should ask. My gut screamed, but my heart kept holding on. I didn't want to be the paranoid, controlling boyfriend. I wanted to be the supportive one, the person she could lean on. I convinced myself I was imagining things, that stress was making me see shadows where there were none. It all came to a head one Tuesday night. Emily had just returned from an especially draining treatment session. She was pale, shivering under a blanket on the couch, and I was in the kitchen chopping vegetables for soup.
Her phone lit up again, this time with a FaceTime call from Matt. She picked up, her tone bright, affectionate, in a way that made my hands stop mid-chop. She smiled, laughed in that way she hadn't for me in weeks, and I realized, horrifyingly, that the intimacy I had been giving, the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the constant presence, none of it mattered in the way I thought it did. She was laughing for him. Her lips curved the same way they used to when she looked at me, but it wasn't for me. I didn't confront her that night. I couldn't. I went to the bedroom, locked the door, and sat there shaking. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to run out into the night, but my body betrayed me. I couldn't move. Part of me rationalized. No, part of me hoped. I was wrong. That maybe she was talking to an old friend, that my paranoia had finally crossed into delusion. But the knot in my chest, that cold, twisting certainty, wouldn't let me breathe. Over the next few days, the tension exploded into paranoia I couldn't manage. I started noticing patterns. The way she would get defensive when I asked casual questions, the way she would lock her phone when I left the room, the subtle blushes, the extra care she took in her appearance before appointments that she refused to tell me about. I tried to rationalize. Maybe she needed a friend. Maybe I was overreacting. I wanted desperately to be the hero, the person she could trust, the one she needed. But the evidence was piling up, silent and undeniable. And then I found it. Her apartment, late one night. I had convinced myself to go through her emails, something I swore I would never do, but my mind couldn't bear the suspense any longer. I found a thread labeled innocuously enough, a series of messages between Emily and Matt that left no room for ambiguity. They were intimate, planning meetings, sharing personal moments I thought only I had witnessed. Every line was a dagger, each word a reminder of the nights I had stayed up, the meals I had made, the times I had begged her to eat, to rest, to fight for herself, while I silently fought for us. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, numb and trembling. The betrayal wasn't just in the act, it was in the timing.
While she leaned on me, while I was every bit the partner she said she needed, she was giving pieces of herself away to someone else. Someone who hadn't held her hair back during a night of fever, who hadn't rearranged their life to make sure she could get to appointments. And I realized, sickeningly, that love isn't always enough. Sometimes loyalty isn't enough. And sometimes, no matter how much you give, it can be given somewhere else without a second thought. The next day, I couldn't bring myself to speak. I went through the motions, drove her to the doctor, waited in the sterile hallway, held her hand while she got her blood work done. But my mind was elsewhere, replaying every moment, every smile, every I love you that now felt tainted with deceit. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, I wanted to collapse in the street and never get up. But I couldn't. Not then. I had to keep her calm. She needed me. And the cruelest part? I still wanted to be there for her, even knowing what I knew. By the end of that week, the house we shared felt like a stage, and I was watching a play I hadn't been cast in. I watched her laugh at messages, her eyes lighting up in a way that I hadn't seen for me in months, and the weight of everything crashed down. I hated her. I loved her. I felt nothing and everything at the same time. And I realized that this wasn't a simple betrayal. It was a story about survival, about manipulation, about how fragile humans can be when confronted with illness and desire and loneliness. That night, I sat alone on the couch, the lights dim, her soft snores coming from the bedroom, pretending sleep would save her from the storm. I couldn't move, couldn't eat, couldn't breathe without remembering every time I had held her hand while she cried, every meal I had prepared, every ounce of love I had poured into someone who had been giving hers elsewhere. And in that quiet, I promised myself that something had to change. I didn't know what yet, leaving, confronting, walking through fire, but I knew I couldn't live like this anymore, half in love, half in despair, fully deceived. And that's when the real nightmare began, trying to reconcile the Emily I loved, the Emily I cared for through hell, with the Emily who could betray me in the quiet, intimate ways that made my heart ache worse than any argument, worse than any fight. Because betrayal isn't loud. It's quiet. It's the laughter in the kitchen you weren't meant to hear, the phone you shouldn't see, the texts you hope are meaningless but aren't. And as I sat there, holding myself, I realized this wasn't just a story about a girlfriend cheating. This was about watching someone you love unravel in sickness, while simultaneously watching them unravel in deceit. After that night, everything changed.
though nothing outwardly did. Emily still smiled, still leaned on me when she was tired, still whispered thanks for being there. But I couldn't hear it the same way anymore. Every word felt like a mask, every touch a carefully timed illusion. I tried to convince myself to be rational. She was sick, stressed, maybe emotionally vulnerable in ways I couldn't understand, but my heart refused. The proof was there, lying on her phone, glowing with betrayal, and it was impossible to unsee. I became hyper-aware, watching her movements, noting when she left the apartment for work events she never invited me to, mentally cataloging every subtle detail that contradicted her words. It was exhausting, invasive, and yet I couldn't stop. Work became another battlefield. I started showing up late, distracted, my usual efficiency gone because my mind was constantly replaying those messages, wondering what he was doing with her at that moment, wondering if she laughed at his jokes the way she hadn't laughed at mine in months. My colleagues started asking if I was okay, and I lied. I smiled, nodded, told them I was tired, that everything was fine. Meanwhile, inside, I was unraveling. My phone would buzz with emails from her or reminders for appointments, and I would feel like my chest was being squeezed in a vice. I couldn't escape it. Even when I left the apartment for a walk, the thought of her with him was omnipresent. One Thursday evening, after a long day of work and a marathon of doctor visits, I reached my breaking point. Emily had gone out to meet a friend, saying she'd be back in a few hours. I tried to sit in the apartment, drink a beer, and calm myself, but every minute dragged, every second burning like acid. I found myself driving aimlessly around Raleigh, the radio playing static songs I didn't even hear, my hands gripping the wheel like it could somehow ground me. And then, on some dumb impulse, I drove past the cafe she had mentioned she'd meet him at before. The place was nearly empty, but through the window I saw them. Her laugh, the same bright laugh I hadn't heard in weeks, the way she leaned in toward him, hand brushing his, fingers lingering, the little touches that made my stomach twist. I wanted to slam my fists on the steering wheel, to scream, to drive away and never return, but instead I sat there, frozen, stomach in knots, watching someone I'd helped through nights of pain, someone I'd begged to eat, begged to rest, someone I'd fought to keep alive emotionally and physically, giving herself to someone else without a thought. And the cruelest part? She didn't even notice me. She didn't have to. I didn't confront her then. I couldn't. I drove home in silence, chest tight, every muscle sore from tension I didn't even know I was holding. When I got back to the apartment, I went straight to the bedroom and stared at the ceiling for hours, replaying every moment of our relationship. I thought about the first time I met her at a friend's party, how effortlessly we clicked, how easy it felt to love her. And then I thought about her lying on the couch sick, letting me hold her, and simultaneously giving herself to someone else. It was like two separate realities existing side by side, and I was trapped in both. The days that followed were a nightmare of contradictions. I would catch glimpses of her phone in her purse or on the counter. I would see the shadow of a text notification pop up and my stomach would drop. Yet every morning she would wake up, look at me with tired eyes, and thank me for being there. I didn't know how to reconcile it. How could someone need you so badly in one moment and betray you so deeply in the next? I became obsessive, following little routines, checking for signs, counting the time she left the apartment, noting her new patterns, the subtle shifts in her wardrobe, the perfume I didn't recognize. My mind became a prison of what-ifs, every scenario worse than the last. One night, I found myself sitting on the floor of the living room, a half-empty bottle of wine next to me, phone in hand, trying to find a way to confront her without destroying her health. Because she was fragile, so fragile, and I still loved her. That's what made it so much worse. I couldn't hate her fully, not completely, because I remembered the nights I had held her while she cried, the days I had rearranged my life to support her. But I also couldn't forgive her, not yet, because my heart was broken and the betrayal was fresh and raw. I decided to talk to her. I needed answers, closure, some semblance of truth, and that conversation was one of the hardest things I've ever had to have.
I waited until she came home from another friend meetup, the apartment quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. She looked tired, and my chest constricted at the sight of her vulnerability. For a split second, my love for her won over my rage. I sat down across from her at the kitchen table, hands shaking, and tried to speak calmly. "Emily, we need to talk," I said. My voice cracked in places I didn't know existed. She looked at me, puzzled. "About what?" I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat making it impossible to speak. I know about Matt," I finally managed. "I saw your messages. I saw you with him." Her eyes widened, and for a moment I thought maybe she would cry, maybe she would apologize. Instead, she went cold, defensive. "Jason, No, don't," I interrupted, voice rising despite my efforts. "Don't make excuses. Don't lie. I know." And then the silence hit, thick and suffocating. She didn't deny it. She just looked away, eyes clouded with something I couldn't read. I wanted to scream, to hit something to make the pain physical instead of mental, but I stayed there, trembling. I didn't mean for it to happen like this, she finally whispered, voice low, almost inaudible. I was lonely, scared. I didn't know how to handle everything. Every word was a knife. Lonely? Scared? While I was sitting in a chair next to her every night, helping her through nausea, helping her through tears, helping her survive? I wanted to laugh bitterly, but it came out as a choked sob. Emily, I was here, I said, voice shaking. I've been here. I've been everything for you. And you, my throat closed. You didn't even hesitate. She flinched at the accusation, but didn't contradict me. She didn't try to soften it, didn't argue. And that made it worse. Because in that moment, I realized the truth. She wasn't just cheating. She wasn't just hiding something. She had made a choice repeatedly while I gave her everything I had. And the betrayal wasn't abstract. It was intimate, every day, continuous. The next few weeks were a blur of quiet tension, passive aggression, and heartbreak I couldn't articulate. I stayed with her because I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't leave a sick person alone, even one who had betrayed me. But every touch, every smile, every whispered thank you felt poisonous. I went through the motions of caring for her, driving her to appointments, bringing her soup, holding her hair back while she was sick, while every fiber of me wanted to run, to disappear, to scream at the unfairness of it all. I was trapped in a nightmare of my own making, and the more I tried to be the supportive boyfriend, the more it crushed me from the inside. One night, after she fell asleep on the couch mid-movie, I sat in the recliner across from her, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. I thought about the first time we kissed, how easy it had felt, how natural. I thought about all the nights I stayed up holding her hair, all the mornings I woke before sunrise to make her tea, all the little things I had done without complaint, without recognition. And then I thought about Matt. Imagined him holding her, making her laugh, making her feel seen in ways I hadn't been able to anymore, because I was too busy being the caretaker, too busy being the responsible one. And I realized the cruelest part of all. I still loved her. It wasn't fair. It wasn't logical. But love doesn't care about fairness or logic, and I was living proof. I spent that night crying quietly, silently, because I couldn't bring myself to wake her. I couldn't face the words I needed to say, and I couldn't bear to face the idea of leaving her alone, even though staying felt like dying a little more each day. And that's when it hit me. I had been blinded by loyalty, by duty, by love. I had supported her through her illness with everything I had, thinking that my presence, my care, my unwavering commitment would be enough to keep us together. But she had chosen someone else anyway. She had taken the very thing I gave, my time, my energy, my love, and let it slip into the hands of someone who didn't fight for her like I did. And all I could do was sit there, broken, trapped between anger, grief, and an unshakable need to still protect her. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't eat the next day. I went through appointments, treatments, and work, all while trying to keep my collapse hidden. I became a ghost in my own life, moving silently, surviving on adrenaline and rage. And the worst part? I realized that this wasn't just a betrayal. It was a lesson in how people can be two different versions of themselves at once. The Emily I knew, the one I loved and cared for, was still there, somewhere under the layers of deceit. But the Emily who chose him, who laughed for him, who allowed herself to be someone else's while I gave her everything, was the one dominating my reality. I started writing things down, fragments of conversations, observations, moments that mattered. I didn't intend to confront her with them, I just needed to process them. Each note, each scribbled sentence, was a tiny step toward reclaiming some semblance of sanity. But the more I wrote, the clearer it became that I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't pretend I was okay, and I couldn't let her walk through life with me, acting normal, while I crumbled inside. It came to a head one evening, sitting in the kitchen with the last of the sunlight slipping through the blinds. I looked at her, and realized that if I didn't act, if I didn't make a decision, I would lose myself completely. And I didn't know if I could survive that. The sickness, the betrayal, the heartbreak, without losing every piece of me that mattered. I had loved her through hell, and now the only choice left was how to confront the aftermath without losing my mind entirely. The night I finally confronted her wasn't cinematic in the way I imagined. There were no dramatic thunderstorms, no epic showdown. Just me sitting across the kitchen table, my chest tight, hands trembling, trying to breathe without hyperventilating. Emily was on the other side, pale, tired, eyes heavy from another round of treatment, and I could see in her expression the exact moment she realized I had crossed the line I'd been holding back for weeks. I had found another series of messages, longer, more intimate, more devastating than the first,
and I couldn't pretend anymore. The betrayal had grown, and my restraint had finally snapped. "I can't do this anymore, Emily," I said, voice low but cutting through the thick air. "I've tried to stay. I've tried to support you. I've tried to love you through all of this, but I can't. Not like this." Her eyes filled with tears, but they weren't the remorseful kind. They weren't the tears of someone realizing the magnitude of what they've done. They were scared, defensive, almost rehearsed. "Jason, I'm sick, okay? You don't understand how lonely it's been. I never asked for this. I never wanted you to." "You don't get it," I interrupted, voice shaking with anger and exhaustion. "I've been here every night. I've held your hair while you puked. I've sat through your appointments. I've rearranged my life for you. And still, you choose him. You chose him while I was saving your life in my own way." The words hung heavy between us. She flinched, looked away, but didn't deny it. And that denial, or lack thereof, was what made the entire betrayal so unbearable.
I wanted to shake her, scream at her, demand answers, but I was too raw, too broken, too tired. I realized in that moment that some truths aren't about words. They're about the weight of action, the undeniable proof of choice. She had made hers. Over the next several days, the apartment became a battlefield of silence. We existed in the same space, but in completely different realities. She would move about, fragile and ill, me watching her, my mind replaying every laugh, every secret message, every lie. I found myself doing things automatically, bringing her food, refilling her water, managing her meds, but with every action, resentment built. My love had turned into this bitter mixture of obligation and anguish. I hated that I still cared. I hated that I still wanted to comfort her, but I couldn't stop. I was addicted to the routine, addicted to this twisted version of love where pain and care were inseparable. One afternoon, I discovered the depth of the double life she had been living. I was cleaning the kitchen when I found a folder on the counter, labeled innocuously enough, something I never would have noticed if I hadn't been obsessively monitoring her. Inside were plane tickets, hotel reservations, even little notes about trips that she had planned with friends that in reality were weekend getaways with him. My stomach twisted, my head spun. I felt like I was suffocating, trapped under the weight of every lie, every hidden moment. How long had this been going on? Weeks? Months? Every sacrifice I had made suddenly felt like a cruel joke. I confronted her again that night, hoping maybe, just maybe, some shred of honesty would emerge. "Emily," I said, holding the folder in my hands, "what is all this? Who were you doing this with?" Her face fell, but she didn't try to deny it. I didn't think it mattered," she said softly. "I needed someone to make me feel alive while everything else was falling apart." I wanted to scream. I wanted to hurl the folder across the room, but I couldn't. Instead, I sat down, feeling the crushing weight of every sleepless night, every appointment, every meal I had prepared while my heart was being shredded in silence. "You mean to tell me," I whispered, "that while I was here, taking care of you, loving you, you were planning trips with him?" She nodded. "I didn't know how else to cope. I never wanted to hurt you. Her voice broke, but the damage was done. "I realized that love and need are complicated, messy things, but they don't erase the choices people make. She had chosen, and I was left to pick up the pieces." The weeks that followed were a blur. I didn't leave her. I couldn't. Her health was fragile, and some part of me still cared, still loved her, even as I despised her. But I became someone I barely recognized, hypervigilant, constantly watching, constantly analyzing, emotionally numb yet simmering with rage. Every time her phone buzzed, I flinched. Every time she got a text I couldn't see, my stomach sank. I was living in a prison of my own making, a caretaker to someone who had deliberately hurt me in ways I couldn't articulate. And yet, the guilt haunted me. I knew I shouldn't feel responsible for her illness. I knew that her choices weren't mine to control. And yet, every time she coughed, every time she winced in pain, I felt compelled to care, to help, to protect. I hated myself for wanting to still be the one she leaned on, hated myself for loving her despite everything. It was a psychological cage, and I was both prisoner and jailer.
One night, after a particularly brutal doctor's appointment, she collapsed in my arms, tears streaming down her face. She was shaking, panicked, terrified. And in that moment, I did what I had done countless times before. I held her. I whispered reassurances. I stayed with her until the shaking stopped, until the panic faded, until she could breathe again. But this time, as I held her, I also felt a profound hatred. I hated that I still cared. I hated that I was trapped in this cycle of care and betrayal. And I hated that she had never truly understood the cost of her choices. The emotional whiplash became unbearable. My friends tried to check in, but I pushed them away. I couldn't explain it. How do you tell someone that the person you love, the person you've supported through hell, has been actively betraying you the entire time? How do you explain that the love you've poured into someone has been met with deceit? I became isolated, trapped in the apartment, obsessed with patterns, messages, trips, hidden texts, every single thing I could find to try to understand why she had done it. But there were no answers that satisfied me, only the stark, painful reality. She had betrayed me, and I was still here, still loving her, still holding her hair back while she was sick. And then came the day I realized that being her caretaker was destroying me. Not physically, though the exhaustion was real, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. I was unraveling in front of her, hollowed out, a shadow of myself. But I couldn't leave because part of me still loved her. Part of me still felt needed. Part of me was trapped in this twisted, toxic cycle of care and betrayal. I started journaling, not for her, not for anyone, just for me. I wrote down every observation, every emotion, every instance of betrayal, every act of care I had given. The pages filled quickly, ink blotting under the weight of everything I couldn't say aloud. It was my only lifeline, the only thing keeping me from collapsing entirely. I also started noticing little things about her that I hadn't before. Not excuses, just facts. The way she would sometimes look guilty, not because I had caught her, but because even she knew that the duality of her life was cruel. The way she would flinch when I raised my voice, even mildly. The way she would clutch my hand briefly while telling me something mundane, like the time of her next treatment. It was confusing, maddening, and heartbreaking all at once. She wasn't evil. She wasn't a monster. She was flawed, human, desperate, and I loved her anyway. And that love was eating me alive. Sleep became impossible. I would lie awake, heart pounding, replaying moments, dissecting conversations, imagining the worst, imagining what he was doing, imagining every lie she had told, imagining every smile I thought was for me but was really for him. The apartment, once a sanctuary, became a cage, each room filled with memories that now cut like knives. And still I stayed because leaving felt impossible, morally and emotionally, because even in betrayal, even in lies, even in deceit, she was sick, and I couldn't abandon her. There were moments, fleeting and terrible, where I considered confronting him directly, just showing up, just forcing the truth into the open, making someone else feel the weight of what they had done. But I didn't. I couldn't. The thought of it made me feel like I might snap entirely, like I might do something irreversible. Instead, I poured all that rage into small, controlled outlets, writing, walking, obsessively cataloging her patterns, trying to maintain some semblance of control in a life that had been utterly hijacked by betrayal. And through it all, I began to understand the perversity of love and loyalty, that they are not always rewarded, that sometimes giving everything to someone can make you blind to their flaws until it's too late.
That even in sickness, even in need, even in vulnerability, people can choose themselves over you. And yet, for all that, I still loved her, still wanted to be the one she leaned on, still wanted her to need me, still clung desperately to the hope that maybe, just maybe, some version of us could survive this. But survival, I began to realize, wasn't about staying together. It was about surviving yourself, and I was barely doing that. Every interaction, every shared meal, every whispered thank you was a reminder that my love, my sacrifice, my devotion had been met with deception, and that knowledge burned more than anything else. It was a cruel paradox. I was trapped by love, betrayed by the person I loved, and bound by my own sense of duty to care for her. I couldn't leave her. Her illness wouldn't allow it. and a part of me still wanted to stay. But staying meant living in constant, unrelenting pain. And the longer I stayed, the more I realized I was unraveling, losing pieces of myself that I might never get back. The breaking point came quietly, almost invisibly, like the final thread of a rope snapping under weight you didn't notice until it's too late. I was driving her home from another exhausting treatment session, the kind where she had barely eaten, barely spoken, barely managed to lift her head without me holding her steady. The car smelled faintly of antiseptic and her hair product, clean, faintly floral, and I thought for a second how much I used to love that smell, how it used to make me feel comforted, like home. But now it made my chest ache with everything I had lost. She was asleep in the passenger seat, curled up, the seatbelt cutting into her shoulder, and I realized I hadn't looked at her without suspicion in months. Every glance had been a calculation. Every touch weighed against 1,000 lies. And suddenly, in that quiet car, I felt it. The crushing, irreversible truth that staying for her health, staying for love, staying for some twisted sense of duty had nearly destroyed me. I was hollowed out, walking through life as a caretaker to a woman who had betrayed me in every way I couldn't forgive. I pulled into our apartment complex, the night air cold and sharp, and I thought, this is it. I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend that holding her hair, preparing her meals, driving her to appointments, keeping her safe, somehow balances out the months of betrayal, the secret trips, the laughter I wasn't part of. I can't keep living a life where love has become this painful, toxic, endless strain that erodes every part of me. When we walked inside, she was still half asleep, fumbling for the blanket I handed her. I watched her carefully, silently, heart in my throat, because I couldn't allow myself to feel anything else right then. I told her, quietly, I need to talk to you. She blinked, confusion in her eyes. Jason, you're scaring me. What is it? I closed the door, leaned against it, and finally let myself exhale. I can't do this anymore, I said, voice shaking. I can't stay in this apartment, in this relationship, living in constant pain while you choose someone else. I've loved you through hell, Emily, and I gave you everything I had, and you've been giving pieces of yourself to him while I was saving your life. I can't live like this anymore. Her eyes widened, and for a moment I thought I might see regret. I thought I might see the woman I had loved, the Emily who had needed me and leaned on me, even imperfectly. But instead I saw fear, confusion, and anger mixed together, a reflection of my own shattered self. You can't just leave me like this, she said, voice trembling. I'm sick. You promised. I promised I'd be here for you, I said, trying to control the tremor in my voice. But being here for you doesn't mean being a doormat. It doesn't mean being betrayed every day, every moment. I've tried to survive this, Emily. I've tried to survive us, and I can't. The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and her shallow breathing. I felt a strange clarity then. Everything I had been carrying, all the resentment, heartbreak, rage, and exhaustion, it had to go somewhere. I couldn't allow myself to continue carrying it for her sake or for anyone else's. I had to reclaim myself, and that meant leaving, even if it broke us completely. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I packed my things quietly, avoiding confrontation, avoiding pity, avoiding any moment that might allow her to manipulate me into staying longer. She cried, pleaded, tried to guilt me, and every word cut through me like shards of glass, but I held firm. This wasn't just about leaving her. It was about leaving the version of me that had been enslaved by loyalty and love and deception. I had to survive, even if it meant walking away from someone I still loved. Moving out was surreal. Driving away with my car packed, watching the city blur past me, I felt like I had left a part of myself behind in that apartment, the part that had loved too much, cared too much, and trusted too easily. And yet, at the same time, I felt something I hadn't in months, a spark of freedom, a breath that wasn't weighed down by betrayal. I was terrified, unsure, and aching with every mile, but I knew it was the only way forward. In the weeks after leaving, I barely spoke to her. No calls, no texts, nothing. I couldn't allow myself to slip back into the cycle, couldn't allow her presence to twist my mind into that state of constant tension again. I threw myself into work, into therapy, into small routines that reminded me I was still Jason, not just a caretaker or a victim of someone else's choices. And slowly, painstakingly, I started to reclaim pieces of myself that had been buried under guilt, love, and betrayal. I learned something unexpected through it all. Betrayal doesn't just hurt, it transforms you. It forces you to confront the parts of yourself you didn't want to see, the parts willing to sacrifice endlessly for someone else, the parts too loyal for your own good, the parts that confuse love with self-destruction. And surviving it doesn't mean forgiving, doesn't mean excusing.
It means walking away even when your heart still wants to stay. I never saw Emily again after I left, not in person, not through messages, and that was for the best. Part of survival was cutting ties completely, refusing to allow her choices to continue dictating my emotions or actions. I had loved her, fought for her, saved her when she needed me, and even in betrayal, I had tried to protect her. But there is a limit to what one person can endure. A line that once crossed cannot be ignored. It's been months since I moved out. I've rebuilt my life in ways I never thought possible, slowly learning to trust my own judgment again, slowly learning that love should never cost you your sanity. And yet sometimes late at night, I remember her. I remember the way she smelled after treatments, the quiet strength she displayed when she thought no one was watching, the fragile moments where she needed me most. And a small, aching part of me still loves her. But it's different now. That love is tempered with reality, with knowledge of her choices, with the clarity that caring for someone does not guarantee loyalty, and that love alone is not enough to sustain a relationship when deceit is involved. I survived because I left.
I survived because I recognized the line, the point at which devotion becomes self-destruction. I survived because, ultimately, I chose myself over betrayal, even when every fiber of me wanted to stay. And that, more than anything, is what I carry with me now. The memory of loving someone through their worst moments, the weight of betrayal, and the strength it took to walk away, while still respecting the humanity of the person who hurt me. Life didn't offer closure in the neat, cinematic way I sometimes imagined. There were no apologies that healed, no reconciliations that mended the past. There was only survival, only the slow, careful reconstruction of a life nearly destroyed by love and deceit. I still think about her, still remember her laugh, still remember holding her hair back while she was sick, still remember the stolen smiles she gave to someone else. And sometimes, in the quietest moments, I let myself feel the pain, the heartbreak, the betrayal. But then I let it go. I remind myself that I survived, that I reclaimed my life, that I no longer live in the shadow of someone else's choices. That's the story, in its rawest form. The nights I sat holding her while she cried, the days I rearranged my life to care for her, the weeks of watching her betrayal unfold in quiet, torturous detail, and the ultimate decision to leave in order to save myself. It's a story of love, devotion, deception, and survival. A story of being human in the most painful, complicated way possible.